Pumped now to be joined here on the Denton Day Show by a good friend of mine, Jordan Dajani. He covers the National Football League for CBS Sports. You can find him on Twitter at Jordan Dajani. Jordan, what's going on, man? How are you?
Denton, what's going on, man? I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. So I want to get into a couple of things in regards to the NFL. But first, I mean, we got to talk a little NCAA tournament and a little bit of the Masters. One, how did your bracket do in the tournament?
This might have been the worst bracket I've ever done in my life. And this actually counts since I've been doing them since I was 8 years old. So 8-year-old Jordan was way more better at picking NCAA games than 27-year-old Jordan was, which is crazy. I mean, it's what I've taken away from it is that the more basketball you watch in regular season, you're going to do worse in your bracket. Okay. Like the people who do the win the bracket challenges, it's always going to be people who don't pay attention during the regular season for whatever reason, because you can't accurately predict the craziness that March is going to bring. So I had a lot of fun watching, but yeah, like when your bracket gets ruined on that first day, like it makes the rest of the tournament less enjoyable, right?
So did you make up for the bad bracket on the gambling trail once we kind of like, all right, the bracket's done and gone away with, let me just start to gamble on games and see what I can come up with?
A little bit. Not until like the final four, honestly. Like the final four, I had a couple of good bets in terms of alternate spreads, parlaying those at a same game parlay, with an alternate total, if you will. Moneyline Kansas, UNC covering was really good in the Final Four. And then in the championship, I had a bunch of money on Kansas as well, and a couple of parlays that had to do with them. So I ended up making it out okay. But yeah, I mean, the NCAA tournament's one of my favorite sporting events of the year,
Right.
and it's always better when your bracket isn't ruined in like the round of 64.
We got the Masters going on. Did you sprinkle any money there, particularly maybe on this Tiger Woods fella? I heard he's pretty good.
Yeah, I got to say, like, I've never been too interested in the Masters. And as I slowly evolve into an image of my father, I hope that changes. Like, I want to love golf, and I used to play it a lot too. So, yeah, I actually did. And I have ESPN Plus, so I have it on right now. And, they have the featured groups, the featured holes that they follow, which I really like paying attention to over the last 24 hours. So, yeah, I did. My dad's really big on that Xander Schauffele guy. He's not having a good round, though. I think he's a San Diego guy. I went to San Diego State. I don't remember. That's where my dad's from. So he's big on him. I like that Will Zalatoris kid, if you know who that is. He played his college ball at Wake Forest for like a year or something before he went pro. I'm a guy with NC connections, and I saw he killed it. What was it, last year in the Masters? He finished like top 5 or top 10 or something crazy. So I'm kind of a fan of his. I put money on him to finish in the top 10, top 5. And then I had some Tiger Woods bets. The juice said that Tiger Woods would not make the cut. It was like minus 140 and like plus 110 for him to make the cut. So I said, if you're going to give me plus money, I'll bet on him to make the cut. And I also made some money yesterday. His over-under for round 1 was like 73, I think. So I bet under on that just for him to have a huge first day. And he did. So that cashed out as well.
Boom. Yeah, I put the money on Tiger making the cut too. It was the same thought process. If you're going to give me positive value on Tiger Woods for the making, like I'll take the positive value there.
Exactly.
Now, it's funny that I mentioned those two things because it feels like, March Madness was supposed to dominate the sports world in the month of March. And yet the NFL did everything in its power to make sure that wasn't the case. And we continue to get more and more on this Tom Brady guy. He retires, then he unretires. And now, according to Pro Football Talk, there was a potential scenario in which he Michael Jordans himself with the Miami Dolphins. What's been your take on that development?
Well, you're right about the NFL trying to take over the month of March. I mean, even on Selection Sunday, Tom Brady stepped up and said, screw those kids. Like, I'm coming out of it and I'm coming back to the NFL. So it's been the craziest NFL offseason maybe in NFL history. And I'm only, 12 years old, so I can't necessarily say that, but it really does feel like that. But in terms of what Tom Brady's been doing and, talking about Bruce Arians also hanging up his clipboard as well, which was really big. I think that there was definitely smoke when it came to the Miami Dolphins. And obviously, I think we can say that for a fact because, going back to the Brian Flores lawsuit, it was reported that Tom Brady was the quarterback that they were trying to illegally flirt with on that yacht down in Miami. So yeah, there's been smoke there. I do think, and this goes back to Bruce Arians as well, and I think that might have been, I'm obviously speculating, but it could be one of those conditions that Tom Brady kind of had when he was coming back out of retirement to the Buccaneers. Even if everything Bruce Arians is saying is 100% correct, and the fact that he wanted to give Todd Bowles a good team to take over before he was really, entering a rebuild. Let's say that all that's 100% true. It doesn't matter. We're all going to tie this back to Tom Brady, because there's no way that Tom Brady coming back to the team and Bruce Arians surprising everybody by retiring are not related at all.
So do you think in this smoke with Tom Brady potentially getting to Miami, do you think that's more him wanting out of Tampa Bay, or do you think he's more, or potentially was enticed by not just the power of being the first player to be a minority owner while he's still playing, but also the opportunity to play his old team in the New England Patriots 2 times every single year?
It's the latter. I don't think that he was like, I'm sick of Tampa. I don't like this Buccaneers organization. I want out. I don't think it was anything like that. I think that the Miami Dolphins provided maybe a bit more opportunity, like you're talking about, in terms of having a different role for that franchise, for that team. I think that's what's more enticing. And of course, getting to line up against Bill Belichick, your old head coach and your old team, the Patriots, would be enticing as well.
So how long do you think it is before we see a player actually pull that off, where they not only are playing for a team, but they strike? Because we've seen these contracts, really get out of control with some of these quarterbacks. How long is it before you think somebody strikes a deal where maybe they're not breaking the market in terms of dollar value, but they're getting a share of ownership in the contract?
Geez, well, the question we need to ask ourselves before that is, what exactly is that not only allowed, but how much would go into that, right? Like, that's something that is unprecedented, right? So I think there's a lot of things behind the scenes that would have to do with this, hypothetical situation that would have to go through the NFL office. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
if you're gonna have more power and wield more power than any player has when it comes to being a part of a specific franchise, that's a whole different thing that, we're yet to see. So, it's interesting because this is something that's been talked about over the past few years with players. I remember I heard rumors, this isn't confirmed or anything, but I remember the Tennessee Titans were chasing Peyton Manning back in, the early 2010s, whatever that year that was, before he went to Denver. And I think a lot of people speculated that, Peyton Manning wanted, some kind of under the table handshake when it came to, having a split of a team or whatever it might be whenever he's done playing football. So, you ask an interesting question, and it's definitely territory that I'm not familiar with, but at the same time, with how crazy everything's been, I don't think you can rule it out that in the future we have a deal that looks like that.
What this offseason itself has been, really, really insane. And even though Miami didn't score Tom Brady, they still get Tyreek Hill. And it seems like this offseason has really seen a fire sale on the wide receiver position, either in terms of trades or guys getting huge contracts. What stood out to you the most in the process of all of those moves going down?
I was posed an interesting question by Blaine Bishop, who was a former Pro Bowl safety for the Tennessee Titans, has a radio show here. He asked me if this was a trend that was born this offseason and that is going to continue as we go forward into the future when it comes to these, not only wide receivers, but maybe star players, younger guys who are looking to break the market in terms of the contract they want to sign. And if the team necessarily can't agree to terms on the money value, then they trade them away to a team that has the cap space to reset the market with them. I thought that was kind of an interesting question. And that's what we've been seeing with the wide receivers this offseason with Tyreek Hill, who it's interesting because that Tyreek Hill trade and Davante Adams trade are related, because Davante Adams going to the AFC West and getting that dollar value actually kicked Tyreek Hill out of the division because it ruined their contract negotiations with the Chiefs, which I thought was interesting. So I don't think that this is a trend that's going to continue, because I hesitate to use this term, but the market has to self-correct itself at some point. Not every wide receiver up for a new deal, like Terry McLaurin, A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, all those guys are not going to be making $30 million a year, right? So that, even though it seems like the direction we're headed, so it's going to correct itself at some point. And the other thing I want to bring up too is that the reason those two players were traded was because they basically fell out of negotiation with their current club. That's kind of been the underlying factor that I feel like is being passed up because there's so much reckless speculation when it comes to Deebo Samuel, AJ Brown, DK Metcalf, all those guys. We have to realize that once you hit a wall with your current team where they're not going to give you that money, that's when you kind of hit the trade block. And I think it's good value because I think the Chiefs made a good decision, right? You know, they didn't want to pay Tyreek Hill that money. So why not get 5 draft picks or whatever it was, save a bunch of cap space and kind of start over that way?
Do you think we're starting to enter kind of an era of the NFL where it almost becomes similar to the NBA, where teams don't seem to care much about draft picks? Like they'll just kind of hand them out like candy on Halloween.
Yes, absolutely. It looks like that. And not maybe the entire NFL doesn't take up that mindset, but there's surely been a lot of teams that have been acting like that over the past year. And the Los Angeles Rams seemingly have opened up a lot of eyes in the front offices. I mean, right? F those picks is like kind of their phrase. And that's what it's kind of seemed like. And there's a lot of teams that seem to be operating under that as well. You get talent on your roster, and you know you have faith in your coaching staff and in your franchise and in the pieces you already have in place, and then you go chase a ring. And that's obviously the goal for every GM, all 32 of them. So, you know, it's definitely something that I'm going to keep an eye on because I don't know if it's always in every case scenario the best move. Because, you know, those people who can build through the draft the correct way, those are franchises that have success as well. So it's been a trend, and it'll be interesting to follow.
Which approach, if you were a general manager, do you find that you would take? Would you take more of a Rams approach where you're going all in for maybe a short window of time, or would you take more of what I consider to be like the Packers approach, where they've been relevant for damn near 20 years, even though it seems like they're consistently falling short?
I want to have a healthy balance. I want to do exactly both. And I think it's a case by case scenario. For example, the Rams getting Odell Beckham Jr., that'd be a move as a GM I'd be all over. I'm trying to bring in that, you know, star wide receiver that I can pair with a few other guys that's going to make my offense find a new ceiling as a whole. But like with Von Miller, I didn't like that move at the time. I guess I was wrong, but you know, giving up, you know, good trade value for an older pass rusher, and that's also going to give you a big cap hit as well. That's not a move that I would have been aggressive with, even though it really did work out. So I think you need a healthy balance. I think that goes for every general manager in terms of you got to pick and choose your spots where you're going to be aggressive, but you damn better be aggressive in those spots, and you got to kind of follow your gut.
So you mentioned that kind of a quad of young wide receivers with DK, AJ Brown, Terry McLaurin, and Deebo Samuel. And as you mentioned, there's been a ton of reckless speculation because of what we've seen elsewhere in the wide receiver position. Do you think that by the time we get to week 1 of the NFL season, any of those 4 guys are wearing a different uniform than they did last year?
Good question. So, yeah, let me follow up the reckless speculation comment. So what happened basically was ESPN, Rich Cimini, I believe his name is, came out and said the Jets were interested in trading for Deebo Samuel or AJ Brown or DK Metcalf. You know, that's a normal report. That's totally understandable. But where it got reckless was other outlets and other journalists, whatever it may be, look at that report and start thinking, okay, well, now the Titans must be open to trading AJ Brown. The Seahawks must be open to it. The 49ers, well, we were kind of slow to say they were open to trading Deebo Samuel, but over the past day, who knows? That's where it kind of got really crazy. And that's why I wrote a piece for CBSSports.com saying more specifically about the AJ Brown case. I was like, listen, like AJ Brown and the Titans, there's no way they've hit a wall in negotiations just yet. And that's what we need for this franchise to put a receiver like that back up on the trade block. So yeah, it was easier to put everything kind of in full view and try to really digest exactly what was happening. Now, and to answer your question, the only one I really see being moved could be DK Metcalf. And the reason is because the Seahawks are clearly entering a rebuild of some sorts, right? They don't have Bobby Wagner. They don't have Russell Wilson. This is a rebuild on both sides of the ball. And if you want to do that, it's very possible you part ways with some of those younger star assets that are coming up for new deals because you might think it would fare better in that instance with your franchise. So that's the one guy I have an eye on. But according to reports, the Seahawks have not been trying to trade with anybody. They've been sending it straight to voicemail. So it's very possible that we don't see another wide receiver trade in terms of a bigger name this offseason.
Now, with all the moves that have been made, whether it be wide receivers or some of the quarterback moves that we've seen, what would you say is going to be the most impactful move as we approach the 2022 season?
Yeah, I mean, Tom Brady returning is certainly one, but I think the new addition would be Russell Wilson. I've been saying for a long time that this Denver Broncos roster, both sides of the ball, it's ready to contend, it's ready to compete. All they have needed is not a serviceable, but a good quarterback under center, and hopefully that's what they got with Russell Wilson. I understand he didn't have the best year last season. He had that hand injury, which of course derailed some of his production. But I think this could be an impactful move. I even said, on a radio show that we could look, fast forward a year from now, we could look at that addition much like we look at the Matthew Stafford Rams trade, something that ended up leading to a Super Bowl. Because if Russell Wilson is still one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL, then this roster really is set to compete with a young, talented wide receiving core. The offensive line's been playing good. The defense has been playing great over the past few years. Their secondary is low-key, one of the better ones in the NFL as well. I get it's the toughest division in the league, but Russell Wilson to Denver could be one of the most impactful quarterback moves of this offseason.
Now, with that division, if you ask four random people on the street who they think is going to win, you're going to get four different answers. Are you leaning Denver as the favorite in that division, or is there another team that you think is in a better spot?
Yeah, I'm totally divided. And it's between Denver and maybe the Chargers. I think the Chargers, if you had to pick one team that really won this offseason in terms of free agency, it might be the Los Angeles Chargers. So I'm kind of split between them and the Denver Broncos. I don't know if you're going to see me. Well, actually, you might see me putting money on a future to win that division because they're all going to be plus money. And, if I can pick two and hit one, then I'm going to make money, obviously. So it's between the Chargers and the Broncos in my mind, but it's hard to rule out the Raiders too. I mean, Derek Carr had a great season last year. And every offseason, it seems like we're having, talks about when are the Raiders going to move on. We didn't have that this offseason, in my opinion. So giving him Devontae Adams, Chandler Jones on defense, this Raiders team's going to be good as well. So, but if I had to pick the AFC West, I'm kind of out on the Chiefs, if you can't tell. And I like the Chargers and the Broncos.
If you had your pick of quarterbacks, you have a team, you need a quarterback, you're a quarterback away, as we say. Are you taking Carson Wentz or Baker Mayfield?
Baker Mayfield, especially in this instance, because Baker comes cheaper. He comes on what is technically a one-year deal. And that's why I didn't understand teams like Washington or Indy. I'd be like, hey, man, let's bring him in. He's got 1 year on his deal. He's not as expensive. Let's tell him, screw everything that happened to you, bro. Show me in this 1 year that you can be my franchise quarterback and take me to the playoffs. That's what I would have been doing instead of overpaying for Carson Wentz and trade value, overpaying for his contract. And then getting Matt Ryan. I don't like that move if you can't tell. So I would have taken Baker Mayfield over Carson Wentz.
When you look at this upcoming draft, how many quarterbacks do you think in this year's class legitimately have a shot 2 to 3 years from now from not just being a starting quarterback, but being a quality starting quarterback in this league?
Maybe one. I'm pretty low on this class, and I feel like it's been stated that this class is not one of the best ones in the NFL draft over the past few years, but because they're quarterbacks, we tend to overinflate their value. You're going to see 3 guys going in the first round in most mocks, but I like Kenny Pickett. He might be the best one in this class. He's the most accurate throwing the football, which I think is important and one of the most important qualities in a quarterback that we tend to overlook in favor of, let's say, upside, right? Malik Willis has that kind of upside that everybody's going to be drooling over. He's the one, if I was taking a quarterback and needed a quarterback in this draft, he's the quarterback I'd want because he has an absolute cannon for an arm. He's a dual threat athlete. That's a guy who has that kind of upside that entices teams. But I think he could end up turning into a star, which would be really cool to see for the Liberty Flames. But Kenny Pickett might be the first off the board to 6 to the Panthers because he has some kind of connection to Matt Rule. I don't love this quarterback class, but the Malik Willis guy definitely intrigues me.
I endorse that answer as a former Liberty Flame. So you've been covering the NFL now for a couple of years, and we've had the good privilege of knowing and working together for a couple of years. Now that you've been in this game for that period of time, do you still have fan allegiances that you had growing up, or has that kind of died down a bit?
To be honest, I actually tried to crush those like when I was in college, moving into my
Mhm.
first career. Like it's kind of funny because I was thinking about this the other day. Like everyone at CBS has fan allegiances, right? Where they're from, who they grew up rooting for. Like in my mind as a kid growing up, like I thought journalists, like you were not allowed to have those. Like if
Mhm.
you knew you were from this area and you rooted for the Washington Commanders, like that's bad. So I tried to crush those early. And, I grew up a big Titans fan. I'm wearing the Titans hat. But in terms of my fan allegiances, like if I'm like sad and mad if the Titans lose. Like I don't get that really anymore. I feel like my love for the NFL and just the job I have has kind of outgrown any allegiance to one specific team, which sounds bad and sounds sad, I guess, but it really isn't. Like I still cover the Titans a lot. I write a lot about the Titans. I write a lot about Washington. But yeah, I feel like since it's your job, like you're not going to get like weirdly sick over a Titans loss. But so I guess that's a good thing. I don't know.
So how did you stumble into this business? Because this business is nuts. It's not like any other, regular 9 to 5 or any other job that most people go to college for. Was this something when you were in your high school days that you knew you wanted to pursue, or was it kind of an accident that you ended up in this spot?
No, I didn't stumble at all.
Mhm.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I didn't stumble into this at all. This is what I've always wanted to do since I was a kid. Like seeing how special sports is and how it's incredible the impact that sports just has on our nation and on our people. Like you can show up to a random hotel bar anywhere in the country and you see a guy wearing a certain shirt of an NFL team and you guys can be best friends in 5 minutes. Like
Mhm.
the impact of sports has on my family and on my relationships, like that was always the coolest thing in the world to me. So to be able, and then I started learning that people write about sports and talk about sports for money, like that's like a job. Well, I was pretty sold there. So I'm talking middle school, high school. That was always the goal. I was going to journalism. I didn't know in what capacity it would be, but I did know I was going to be a journalist and I wanted to cover sports.
So what first drew you to that? Because I'm sure there had to be either a moment or a collection of moments where you had that realization that this is something that really does, like it's not just a game, if you will, like it brings people together. What was that moment for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's probably a couple. I mean, in high school, I went to one of those like, ritzy private schools that were very small. And it was very centered around reading, writing, speaking. We took like a rhetoric class in high school. So communication, I kind of fell in love with. I loved writing and stuff like that. And so I felt, I figured out that's kind of the life of a journalist, and that would fit me well, no matter if I was covering the weather or covering local news or covering sports.
Right.
So I kind of fell into communication in high school, maybe in terms of me loving that. But in terms of following sports whenever I possibly could, that was always something when I was a kid. Like my family and my extended family are just obsessed about sports. Like you get us together and we're talking about, assistant coaches from D2 basketball. We're talking about, Tennessee sports. We're talking about what's going on in North Carolina, the NFL. That's just always dominated any kind of family discussion I've ever had in my life. So
Mhm.
that's where the love really began. And I always knew that was something that I was going to follow for the rest of my life, whether that was a journalist or as a fan. Like sports was always going to be a big part of my life. So once I figured out that you could kind of pair the two together in terms of journalism and making money, a little bit of money, not much money, and then NFL fandom as well, like that's kind of where it hit home for me. So thankfully, I knew exactly what I wanted to do when I was like, 12, 13 years old. So I know a lot of people aren't privileged to have kind of that realization, but I did. And since I did, I thought it was only fair that I attack it every possible way I can.
Now, there's two forms of writing as a journalist. You can either be a guy that breaks a ton of news, or you can kind of do more opinion based pieces. Do you have a preference in which one you enjoy more at this point in your career?
Well, I've never broken big news, but I'd like to. That'd be kind of cool. So I don't know what that experience is like. I'm not Schefter, but I mean, I would say probably both if I could. I would say both. I think they're different and I think they're similar, all in the same. Having an opinion on something is definitely fun, and I think that CBS Sports does a really good job of not forcing but pushing us in that direction in terms of us having an opinion on trades. We grade trades. We write a lot.
Mhm.
I write a lot about gambling. I'm going to do a column actually for the USFL, and I don't know anything about the
Cool.
USFL coming up, so I'm going to be doing a gambling column on that. So Yeah, I mean, when it comes to journalism, I get that there's one section of it is definitely reporting the objective facts and how does this affect the industry and us at large. But also, being able to have an opinion and say that I like this free agency move. I really don't like the Carson Wentz move. That's a big part of it as well.
What was the experience like in college as you really start to attack this career and you start to take the steps necessary to become what you've become? What was that process like in college? Was it easy to get a hold of people that allowed you to put your name on a byline and write something?
It was so fun. And yeah, I would say so. Like, I mean, it's college. So like, we had our official electronic news website that had a sports section that
Mhm.
I wanted to write for. And we had a radio station also that I worked for as a disc jockey and as a sports host. We had a TV channel on at Tennessee's campus that was student run and everything, and from production to talent. I love doing it all. And I knew that I had to get as much experience as possible with this industry because it's so hard to get a job and so hard to stand out. So when I was in college, it kind of became clear that I had to basically do everything I possibly could to help myself, down the road as a professional. And I would say that college made it pretty easy just with all the opportunities they had. If you wanted it, it was available.
What was it like going to school in Knoxville? I happened to have the pleasure to be there for a couple of days, about a year ago. Had some really, really good food there. What was it like in that environment, that campus?
I love Knoxville, and it was special to me because I grew up in North Carolina mostly. I lived in
Mhm.
Ashburn, Virginia for a little bit, but mostly
Hey.
North Carolina. Yeah, but mostly North Carolina. So like I said, I went to a smaller private high school, which I really liked, but I wanted to do the opposite. I wanted to go to a big school. So it was between Tennessee and South Carolina, really.
Mhm.
And I had some extended family go to Tennessee. And I visited there when I was a kid, go to football games and see Eric Berry and stuff. So I decided to go to Tennessee, and it was one of the best decisions I made. I mean, the campus is awesome, the school is awesome, the curriculum is awesome. You meet lifetime, friends. So I love Knoxville. It's definitely like a second home to me. I live in Nashville now, but Knoxville was a very special part of my life. I love going to a big school like Tennessee. Waking up those Saturday mornings when all people can talk about is the football game coming up. Like, that's a special feeling when you go to a big school that's so focused on sports like that.
Mhm.
So it was a lot of fun.
So, Jordan, I'll get you out of here with this. We started talking a little bit of gambling. I feel like it's only right that we finish there, and we'll stay on with the Tennessee Volunteers. At one point in time, they were a powerhouse in college football. So, I'll give you a line here. Over under, we'll say 5.5 years that Tennessee makes its return to glory and sits atop the SEC.
Gosh, this has been a question that every single Tennessee grad's been talking about for the past decade. I gotta say this. There's legitimate reason to have cautious optimism now more than ever with the head coach we got in Josh Heupel, the quarterback we got as well, and Hooker. There's reason to be excited, and I think that he made some really great strides in year one in terms of how explosive this offense can be. We kind of operate like an air raid right now, almost as if we're Pac-12 and we don't play defense, but we need to change that around, make additions to defense. But I mean, there's reason to be excited about the future. And they just landed a quarterback for the future that's going to, if he does sign, that is going to be the highest rated recruit to ever sign with the Volunteers, which is exciting as well. So there's reason to be excited if you're a Tennessee fan. But I mean, I've said that before when I was in college too, so I don't want to get too ahead of myself. But yeah, seeing Tennessee be one of those powerhouses like they were back in the late 90s would mean everything to me for sure.
Jordan, can't tell you how much I appreciate it, my friend. It's always great to catch up. Appreciate you jumping on, man. Looking forward to doing it again soon.
Anytime, man. Thank you so much.